All right, how is everybody today? Uh, I'm Sherry Easton, the Advocacy Director of Survivors Fighting for Change Foundation. We are an advocacy group who supports victims of child sexual abuse, and we lobby for legislative changes, provide awareness, information, all that good stuff. Today, we are having a discussion that we're calling Teen Talk. So let's have the conversation. We're going to be discussing information specific to teens and parents who have teens. We were contacted by a member who follows us asking if we have information and resources specific for teens. They have a 15, 16-year-old son who has a 14, 15-year-old girlfriend, and they want to make sure that they understand all the laws in order to protect their son and anybody that their son may be interacting with, to make sure that he's acting appropriately, not doing anything illegal. One thing that we do know is when you commit criminal offense and you're charged with it, the defense of "I didn't know that is illegal" is not a defense. So you want to make sure that you're aware and that you're educating your teens so that way they don't do something they weren't aware that they shouldn't be doing. So today we have Bonnie Ewing. She's a licensed lawyer who practices in Alberta, Canada, and she's going to be helping us break down some of this information so that way we make sure we're getting our information from a reliable source and we know that this information is going to be good information for parents and teens to know. So, Bonnie, do you just want to maybe start off by saying hi and letting people know what law firm you work at?
So I work at Affinity Legal in Lacombe. My main areas of practice are criminal law and family law. And I've been practicing since 2002.
Okay, perfect. So we want to start the conversation just by getting into what do our teens need to know about legal and safe online use. So one of the questions was, what are the rules around teens sharing and requesting photos that could be inappropriate? So for example, you have a 15 or 16-year-old boy who's has girlfriends or whatever, and they're sharing photos back and forth. Are there any legalities surrounding this? What do teens need to know about this type of behavior and use of online images and sharing images outside of we know that we shouldn't do it. it's it's not smart to share inappropriate photos with anybody because you never know where that photo could end up. Um, and we always say that the number one rule to teach your teens is that if it's something that you wouldn't want your parents or your teacher to see, then don't share it on social media and don't share it to other people. If it's a photo, a video, or text, anything like that, because it can be shared, it can get on social media, and the people that you don't want to see it can end up seeing it, and it can end up being bad. But back to the legal side of things, if, say, I'm a teenage boy or a teenage girl and I'm sharing inappropriate photos back and forth, what are the legalities surrounding this? So, specifically, teens with teens.
Well, if you're just sharing photos with each other legally, there's nothing wrong with that. Where the legal aspects come in is if you're then sharing that photo with other people. So under Section 162 of the Criminal Code, it's actually illegal to distribute intimate images. The reason that was brought into force, it's only been in effect since 2015, and it was specifically as a result of revenge distribution. So where a couple, they're sharing images, they break up, and then one of them will share those intimate images, like they'll show other people or distribute them to other people as kind of a revenge because of the breakup. Some of it do it just because they're bragging, but it actually is a criminal offense. If the Crown proceeds by indictment, you're looking at the maximum sentence is 5 years. And if they proceed summarily, the maximum sentence is 2 years less a day for distributing those images. And once they're out there, you're not getting those back. Not only that, but with not only is there you're likely to be charged with distribution of intimate images, there's also the risk of possessing or distributing child pornography if that person is under
Yes.
the age of 18.
Yeah, good point. So basically, what this comes down to is consensual sharing of photos with each other is not illegal, but as soon as somebody who receives a photo of somebody else or an intimate image, if they then share that with another party or publicly, that's when you start running into legal issues, and that's when it can become a criminal.
If they're sharing those images without the consent of the person that those images are of.
Okay. So then let's get into consent, because and these rules regarding consent when it comes to the criminal code and how it's defined and what they consider consent when it comes to criminal offenses. This applies equally to both youth and adults. So whether you're a teen or an adult, the definition of consent is the same, unless we're talking about age differences, which we'll get into after. But as far as a teen consenting with a teen, the definition would be the same as an adult consenting with an adult. So this information would apply to adults as well. And I don't think there's a lot of adults who really understand consent and what that legal definition is, let alone teens. So I think it's important for adults to be aware so they can make their teens more aware, because you can really get into some serious trouble if you're not obtaining proper consent. And so, Bonnie, can you just explain what the definition of consent is, what it means to obtain consent?
And so consent with what? With respect to distributing photos, or consent with respect to sexual activity?
In general, both.
Okay. So basically, consent involves the person actually saying, yes, it is okay for whatever activity to happen. So they have to specifically say, either well, you can have implied consent as well. So for example, if you're going to kiss somebody and they're kissing you back, that's implied that there is consent. Well, that's a tricky one, because just because somebody doesn't say no and they might participate doesn't necessarily mean they're consenting. The best way to do is if you're actually getting explicit consent, where you're actually asking for even if it's a hug, you should be asking for consent to even give somebody a hug. You should be saying, "Is it okay if I give you a hug?" Because even that can be, you need consent for that as well. Anytime you're touching somebody else in any way, it needs to be on consent. And somebody can consent to one thing and not another thing. And somebody can start out consenting and withdraw that consent. So every time you're doing anything, even if you're, so let's take a sexual activity for example. Just because you have consent to kiss someone doesn't mean you have consent to go any further than that, right? So you're wanting to get consent all the time. Anytime that the activity changes, you're wanting to make sure that you get consent for that activity to change. Even during an activity, you want to make sure that the person is still consenting, because silence is not consent. somebody's specifically saying, somebody doesn't have to specifically say no to show that they're not consenting. So you technically need to get consent all the way along. Just because you get consent at the beginning doesn't mean that there's consent all the way through whatever the process is. Is that what you?
So consent means getting a yes for the specific activity.
Yes.
And you want to also make sure that you're getting consent every time. So,
yes.
For example, we have people who are in relationships and who have been in relationships, partnerships, marriages for several years, and consent still applies the same ways it would to somebody who's not married or not in a committed relationship.
That's correct. Because just because they consented last night doesn't mean they're consenting this morning. Or because they consented last week doesn't mean they're consenting today. So just because they've consented before does not mean that they're consenting for every future activity.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's something that a lot of people didn't realize, that is the standard for consent in Canada. You need consent every time. You need a yes response every time, and they need to be giving that consent to the specific activity that's taking place, or the specific touch.
And sexual assault can occur whether or not you're in a relationship and whether or not you're married. Just because you're married to the person or in a relationship with the person does not mean that it's not sexual assault.
Exactly, yes. And so that's why I say these rules apply the same regardless of whether you're married or you're in a relationship or you're just friends or whatever the situation is. And regardless of whether you're an adult or whether you're a youth, these rules apply the same to everybody in every situation, no matter what.
Yes.
That's one nice thing about that is that it's a very set standard for that. But we definitely need to make sure that as adults we understand what that standard is and that we're teaching that standard to our youth, to prepare them for adulthood, because being charged with a sexual offense, due to lack of consent because they weren't aware of what the definition of consent within our criminal code actually is,
Right.
is very unfortunate, and it's preventable. So education goes a long way.
Yeah.
The last thing I wanted to discuss really quickly, Bonnie, if you can just explain the age limits regarding relationships and uh, inappropriate communication and contact and touching and so on and so forth when it comes to youth as well as adults with youth. So
are you talking about being able to consent to sexual activity? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, exactly. So what is the age for consent, and what ages are they allowed to consent up to?
Okay. So under the age of 12, they cannot consent. So even if they say they consent, they legally cannot consent under the age of 12. When they're 12 to 13 years old, they can consent to sex, but only with somebody who is at the most 2 years older than them. So, for example, if they're 12, the person can't be older than 14. If they're 13, the person can't be older than 15. When they're 14 and 15 years old, the maximum age of the person, they can consent, but the maximum age of the person can't be more than 5 years older than them. So, for example, if they're 14, the other person can't be older than 19. And if they're 15, the other person can't be older than 20. And once you turn 16, you can consent. You can consent, period. There's no age limit there.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, I almost feel like I want to make a little chart to
There
break
actually
that
is,
down because
there actually is a chart.
okay, I'm gonna find that chart and I'm gonna post
I can
that
give
on our
you that.
social media. I'm gonna print that out and put it in our binder that we bring to our events. Because it's so important for people to understand what those limits and restrictions are. So lastly, what teens need to know about reporting. So when teens experience interactions from people that are inappropriate, especially from adults, but even other teens, it's very important that they report this behavior. And again, we want to teach children and youth, everybody, we don't report to just one person. We make sure we report to multiple people. In Canada, it says on average, a child or youth must report their abuse to 3 different adults before they're believed and something is done about it. So we want to make sure that we're teaching our children and youth to report to several different people. Also, we need to keep in mind, especially with youth, they likely won't report to the parents first. It's likely going to be a friend, a teacher, principal, something of that nature. So we want to make sure that they're reporting multiple times and that they're not discouraged by somebody not responding appropriately or not necessarily believing them. So reporting if something is happening inappropriately is very important. Making sure that your teens understand what the age limits and restrictions are so they understand that if somebody is 21 and they're 15 and they're sending them inappropriate images, that not only is it inappropriate for them to do that, but it's also illegal. A lot of teens might not understand the legalities surrounding that, and that this person can actually be reported to the police, that something can actually be done about this, which is a good reason why a lot of teens don't report this type of stuff. A lot of them, according to studies, will use the social media platforms to report people who are acting creepy or inappropriate with them on social media. However, they also report that those reporting methods are very unsuccessful. They don't really prevent a lot of that activity from continuing, as people can just create more new accounts and then come back and follow you, and then you block them and then they create a new account, they come back and start sending you more messages, so on and so forth. So it's important that parents make sure their teens know that they can deal with this stuff outside of the reporting features available on the platform that they're using, and that they should go to local police. They should let adults know in life that this is happening. They shouldn't be embarrassed. They haven't done anything wrong. They won't get in trouble. Having these conversations and letting them know that it's okay for them to come to you about this stuff really opens up that door, because without having that conversation with them, it's very easy for them to dismiss this behavior. And these people who are doing this are likely doing it to several children and youth on social media, likely not just yours. So we want to make sure that we're doing what we can to prevent this. And by people reporting this behavior, that's going to be a good first step in deterring it. Also, educating our children and youth so that way they understand this behavior is inappropriate, what the signs are, and what to do if they come across it. So we want to make sure that youth actually have ways to report inappropriate behavior, especially online. And this even could be in a group chat with other kids at school, other teens. It could be in a private chat with another kid at school. It could be through a game platform. It could be through social media. It could be anything like that. If you have a teen who all of a sudden somebody's sharing inappropriate photos of them that they didn't get permission for them to share, that's something that they should report. Your children should know that it's illegal for them to do that. Your youth team should know that it's illegal for them to do that and that there are legal consequences if they do that. This is all very important stuff. So make sure you're having these conversations with your teens. Make sure you're finding out the information, the answers to your questions. If anybody has any questions about any of this, that we've covered, feel free to reach out to us. You guys can contact us through any of our social media, or you can send us an email to survivorsfighting@gmail.com.
I do have a
Bonnie, do you have
couple.
anything else that you would like to add before we finish up?
I do. So there's two things I wanted to add. Number one, I just wanted to comment about where you said that people may report, children may report to other people, and one of those people might be a friend. And that's fine, but if that friend doesn't tell anybody, that friend should also tell an adult. If they're being told by a friend that they've been sexually assaulted, then they should be telling an adult, because just telling a friend probably isn't going to do anything. And the other thing I want to make is, when I was talking about the consent and the age differences, like the 2 years and the 5 years and then plain consent, that consent doesn't count if that person is in a position of trust or authority towards that person, or if they're in a relationship of dependency on them. So, I mean, a person of trust, it could be a babysitter, it could be an employer, like if they're young and have a job, it could be a teacher, it could be a parent or a step parent, anybody that, a coach, it could be any. So if that person is in a position of trust. So for example, if it's a babysitter, if it's a 12-year-old girl and it's a 14-year-old babysitter, because that person is in a position of trust or authority, that consent does not count.
Yes, exactly. And that brings up another good point, that we definitely want to make sure we're also teaching our children and youth what to expect from authority figures in their lives, what authority figures are allowed to do and what they aren't allowed to do, and what children and youth should do if an authority figure does something that's inappropriate. So again, we want to tell them to keep telling. And yes, exactly. That's why I say it's very common that most children, when they do tell, the first person they tell is a friend, and that likely isn't going to get them a lot of help, which is again why we want to tell them to keep telling, and we want to give them trusted adults that they can tell, examples of trusted adults that they should be telling. They should be telling multiple adults. And also, if, say, for example, you've had this conversation with your child or your teen, and they know how important it is to tell an adult if something is happening, and all of a sudden their friend is telling them about something that's happening to them that's inappropriate. Now your teen has the information and knowledge to help their friend. So hopefully, because you've had that conversation, you opened up that door, your teen will actually come to you and say, hey, this is happening to my friend. What can we do? And that kind of gets the ball rolling. So yeah, we want to make sure that we're instructing teens and youth, children, to tell as many people as possible. We want to help them identify trusted adults in their lives that they can tell. So again, teachers, principals, parents, friends of parents, people within your circle, basically grandma, grandpa, aunts and uncles, trusted adult figures to them. And yes, we want to make sure they understand what authority figures are allowed to do and aren't allowed to do. We do not want our children and youth having this impression that adults are always right, and that if what they say goes, especially when they're not in your presence. So we want to make sure that children understand that there are boundaries, and they know what the boundaries are, and they know what to do if somebody breaks those boundaries. Other than that, guys, I think that is it for today. Like I said, just wanted to have a quick talk, get this information out there. Please feel free to share this information with your friends, your family. The more people that see it, the better. Keep an eye on our schedule. We are in the middle of getting everything planned for the summer. We have a ton of events happening. We have a big one that's happening in Edmonton. We haven't even posted about this yet. But we'll be doing a child ID kit event in Edmonton, where we will be distributing free child ID kits at the Bountiful Farmers Market. So that's an indoor market in Edmonton. We'll be there for 3 days. It'll be the long weekend, over Canada Day long weekend. So we're very excited about that. We'll be doing some fundraising for that event to help cover the cost for those ID kits. So anybody wants to help out, please reach out to us. We have our online auction at the end of the month that's happening on our Facebook page. So we have some great donations that we're going to be auctioning off there. Lots of fun. And then again, we'll be traveling across Alberta this summer again, visiting markets all over the place with our information packages, as well as some other great things. So keep an eye out on our schedule. We'll be creating events for everything that we're doing, and that will all start coming out soon. Right now, we're just starting to post items that we will be auctioning off for the online auction. It starts next Sunday, I believe, the last Sunday of May. I believe that's the 29th. So keep an eye out for that, guys. And like I said, if anybody has any questions or needs anything, definitely reach out to us. Everyone here should know how to get a hold of us by now. So thank you guys for joining us. Thanks for listening. And hopefully we will have something new for you here soon that we can provide some new information. If anybody has a topic or anything that they're interested in learning more about or would like more information about, feel free to reach out to us and we will do some research and make it available to as many people as we can. So otherwise, guys, have a great night. Thank you, Bonnie, for taking the time to join us. Very gracious that you did that.
Well, thank you for having me.
And otherwise, no, thank you. And have a great weekend, everyone. Enjoy your long weekend.